I figured out, I could figure this at any point, but I'm not really good at math. But I've been an artist for 48 years now, starting when I was 17 years old. And I used to do a lot of chalk talks and stuff to school groups, both Christian school and public school kids. And over time, you kind of evolve your spiel. And I came to realize in the process of doing that, and I wanted to tell kids this, that I'm a very strong believer, as I'm going to guess most of you guys are, in God-given talent. Okay? I could always draw, and I could always draw better than my contemporaries, whether you're talking about kindergarten or first grade. So I have a number of really amazingly talented artist friends who are not necessarily Christians, and we would have this conversation. And one of my close friends, who's one of the best artists I know, would say, "No, it wasn't me. And I taught myself this. I essentially created this. I stayed in from other kids were out playing baseball and this, and I worked at it. And I'm like, okay, well, if avoiding baseball made you a great artist, I would be the greatest artist on earth. But you have to have something to start with, And I would try and tell kids that. So you watch me. These kids would have. You'll see my stuff now. But these kids would watch me for 40 minutes or whatever. And when I was done, I'd go, okay, so for 40 minutes, you just watched me do the only thing I can actually do. The only thing I actually do well. If I was going out to recess next in Timothy, where the fascists forced us to play baseball during recess, not only would I be the last person chosen for the teams, I would actually be somebody who, if the other team noticed I didn't bat, they would call attention to the fact that I didn't bat because they wanted that sure out, And I would tell these kids that if I went to the parking lot, my car didn't work, I would be stuck here. Unlike maybe their fathers or their brothers, I can't. I eventually came to realize what I am really good at is I'm a flashlight holder. For other people who know what they're doing, it's like, okay, I'll hold the flashlight, I work on my engine and stuff like that. So I would tell these kids, and I think this is true, and hopefully, I'm not the final word on this. It's just my observation, but God gives you some kind of ability, and at some point in your life, you find out what it is, and then I feel like your obligation is to nurture that, and to develop that, and sometimes, and like in my case, you can make a career out of it. Not everybody can. I've known some really talented artists who never could really, make a living out of it, and the expression "starving artist" doesn't come from nowhere, But even those people, they might have been, if they were driving a truck, at night they would do their music, or they would paint, or whatever they did. When I first started working in an ad agency, there were all kinds of talented, amazingly talented people who, painted International Harvester equipment during the day, but at home were like phenomenal portrait artists and stuff. So that's just a thing that I think we all have. So you'll see, I'll go through kind of what I've done. But the other thing about talent to me is that God gives everybody a talent, and it's not just Christians. And it's just sort of my view that if I look at the world of art, music, whatever, it almost seems to me that God has given the bulk of the talent to non-Christians. And that's obvious in the sense of who are the people who are famous people in these areas. Now, fame isn't the ultimate thing, but all the major writers that I like, all the major musicians that I like, all the major artists that I like, are not Christians, but they can't thwart God, in my view. It's like God gave them that ability, and they may not be expressly using it for God, and they may not actually even acknowledge that it comes from God, as my friend does. But they can't stop that, you know what I mean? It's like John Steinbeck was not a Christian, but he wrote two of my favorite books, of Mice and Men and The Grapes of Wrath. And those books have given me insight into human beings and human nature and family relations in a way that I can't really name any Christian artist or author who's done that for me. So it's just an observation. And if you think about the fact that a few years back, well, several years back now, it was like worldwide news that Bob Dylan was a Christian or became a Christian. It's like, why would that be a big deal? Because people aren't accustomed to that, But I'm sure all of you have the art, the entertainers, artists, movie makers, authors, whatever, that speak to you in that way. I noticed a couple of years ago that Eric Metaxas took some heat for posting somewhere online that he'd been to an Elton John concert, and it was like a spiritual experience. and everybody, it's sort of anal way that Christians do, starts citing chapter and verse about why that can't possibly be. He's gay, he's this, he's that, how could that be the case? But, I had that experience with any number of people. So that's just my upfront thing about talent. I think that you can't claim responsibility for it. You can do something with it. And so you'll see kind of what I tried to do with it. This sort of obnoxious thing that allows you to look at 15 different versions of myself is there because, as I'll go through this, the ability to work in different art styles, to draw in different cartooning styles and stuff has always been kind of a significant part of the way my job progressed. Nothing I saw coming. So anyway, let's start. No. Okay, that's already screwed up. What should I do?
It went forward 2 instead of 1.
I know, but now it's like the grocery list. I wasn't joking when I said this. I can't even show you this. Okay, I grew up in Berwyn. That's my way of preempting any jokes about Berwyn. So now what do I do? How do I get this? Okay, hang on. All right, there. Okay, I grew up in Berwyn. So that's the Berwyn of my youth. My family went to Ebenezer Christian Reformed Church. That's where I went to. It just keeps disappearing. Do you want me to just say change the slide?
Just say.
Okay. So if you look at the letters on that, I collect a wide variety of stuff. This is a postcard from Berwyn, a vintage postcard. But if you look in the Y, which I didn't even notice when I first got this, that's Ebenezer. And if you look in the N, that's St. Mary's Cell, the local Catholic church that was right across the street from my house growing up. Next. That's my family when I was in high school. I had 2 sisters and a brother, and at this point I had a sister-in-law who was in that photo. My brother had gotten married. That's there to say that my parents were very supportive of what I did. And I met not a lot, but I've met some of the more talented people I've known whose parents were not supportive at all. I mean, art is not a field that a lot of people think, oh, well, this is a great way to go, you're going to be all set with this. And I worked with a really talented woman when I was doing greeting cards who was just a depressed person almost, because her life growing up had been so bitter, and her parents were constantly reinforcing to her what a waste of time this was and stuff. And yet she was phenomenal. I mean, she persevered in spite of that. But in terms of blessings, I'll just go in order. I had the ability to draw, which worked out well for me, and I loved it. But also a family that was supportive of it, which was good, because I grew up in the '60s, and I don't think the average person, literally thought, oh, hey, way to go, this will be great, you're going to be an artist. Most people didn't even know where art came from, so next. I went to Timothy my whole life. That's a Timothy grade school that I went to in Cicero. It was in color then. But that's where Al mentioned his brother-in-law Gerald, who was one of my great friends my whole life. When I was a kid at Timothy, I was the kid who could draw. That was my designation. Nobody else really, aside from Gerald later on, kind of got into it. Nobody else really drew, But at that time, being the kid who would draw was not that much different than being the kid who wet his pants in gym. Or I don't think that it wasn't some awesome thing. Like my parents were supportive, but you didn't get any special treatment for this, even though it was kind of an oddity. I think the Timothy community back then, and the CRC and the Dutch mentality, they don't bestow a lot of they're not bowing down to you for this. It'd be like if Einstein had been a kid at Timothy, it would have just been like, hey, Albert's good at math. Nobody would have seen him as anything. So anyways, I did all the normal things a kid does in grade school. Did stuff when I could, and there was an opportunity to sometimes do program covers or whatever for the Timothy plays and kids programs and stuff. You can go to the next one. That's me on the left. So the main thrust of this to me, in some ways, when I look at my art career, is I had no training ever of any kind. What I did have was a curiosity, which I think is very important in art and in life in general. And I developed an absolute obsession from the time I was a kid with all the cartoons and comic books and golden books and coloring books and stuff that all were full of art that really just like excited me. So that's there to illustrate that at that age, I was already enamored of Yogi Bear. That was my beloved Yogi Bear doll. You can go to the next one. Saturday mornings, I lived for Saturday mornings. It was like every year the new shows, and in those days you had like 3 channels, so I'd literally be switching back and forth the first Saturday to establish which were my favorite cartoons so I'd know to watch the next week. I could not get enough of this stuff. I joined a bowling league once when I was a kid, and I ended up quitting after a few weeks because it was on Saturday morning and I wasn't seeing the Saturday morning cartoons. The next one. Of course, as a kid, Walt Disney was a big idol, and everything that came from Walt Disney. Kids like me, I compared notes to other people when you were growing up. It was always like, well, Jimmy's going to work for Walt Disney. So the average person didn't have any idea where an artist would have worked, so everybody knew Walt Disney. And yeah, so I loved all of that stuff. You can go to the next one. A huge influence on me was the Warner Brothers cartoons. Not just the drawing style, but the humor of them. I loved them. I've had the great fortune in my work life to meet a lot of my heroes. So I met guys that were the directors of these cartoons. One of them in particular, Bob Clampitt, became a friend of mine. When I was a kid, he created Beanie and Cecil, which was like one of my favorite cartoons as a kid. You can go to the next one. Some more Looney Tunes stuff. Terry Tunes, that was a big thing, Mighty Mouse and all that stuff. Go to the next one. Walter Lantz cartoons. When I was a kid, there was a Woody Woodpecker show that Walter Lantz was on as the host, and he would draw Woody Woodpecker, and it was just entrancing to me. And a huge influence stylistically as a kid was the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, which were just so huge when I was a kid. That's actually a thing I did myself, just because I like to draw the characters. I like their little tributes. So that's the Hanna-Barbera stuff. And then, of course, the Japanese cartoons like Speed Racer and Ash Boy. When I was in high school, in spite of the fact that I'm like the most inept sports person, I've never even seen a football game. I don't know anything about sports, but Timothy is a very jock cultured place, and so in high school, in an attempt to prove my heterosexuality, I joined the track team. My brother had been a track, and so I remember going the first day, and we run around after school forever. And it's like, okay, fine. We get off the bus, and I say to somebody, "So when do we do this again?" And they're like, "Tomorrow." Tomorrow? Like, let's do this every day? And I literally said, "This is cutting into Speed Racer," and I quit. So I would go and just watch Speed Racer. Another big thing for me when I was a kid was I loved all the local Chicago kids shows, and I loved puppets. Puppets to me are just like three-dimensional cartoons. So Garfield Goose was like one of my early manias, and that was sort of bookended in the end of that era, in the late 60s and early 70s, with a guy named Bill Jackson in a show called Cartoon Town. And he was an artist, so not only did he have really cool puppets, but he would draw. And I watched the show like religiously. You can go to the next frame. That's like his cast of characters. And I was just obsessed by that. And I've met a lot of artists since who have said, yeah, that was a kind of a big influence on them. And my love of these kid show things is I do work with the Museum of Broadcast Communications downtown, which is a radio and TV museum, and I'm like the kids curator, which means I get to build the displays for all those puppets, and I've met those people. And Bill Jackson in that previous shot, who just died earlier this month, it was in the news, or last month, became a friend of mine, and it was one of those little things where like you find out like, oh, he's a Christian too, which was great. It just brought it to another level, and it didn't surprise me. But it was just great to know. So there I am in probably 12 or 13, displaying what became my real obsession besides animated cartoons, which was comic books. Go to the next one. I was like a kid like this. I haunted the stores for comic books. My two main sources were the newsstand on the corner of Cermak and Oak Park, and the drugstore on Roosevelt and East Avenue. And if I wasn't doing that, I was literally getting on my bike and riding as far as I could in any direction down a busy street to find another place that sold comic books, because in the 60s they were distributed very badly, so you could get an issue of Batman one month and not see another one for a few months. So that That was really a big deal. And if I could coerce my parents or my older brother to do it, this is North Clark Street in the late 60s and 70s. It was essentially like Skid Row, but they had a lot of used books and magazine sellers there. So, and I can also remember like in junior high, well, go to the next one. So there is junior high, right? That was the old Timothy High School. At this point, I would be, getting involved in the school paper and stuff like that. Although not everybody was always really enthused by this art thing. I can remember my first day of seventh grade, and we had a teacher named Jerry Keene, who I remember really seeing smiles and nods. But so I remember my first day of this class. I'm in his homeroom. It's in the morning. And he's going down the row, like, okay, oh yeah, Jack's swearing. Oh yeah, Phil. And he gets to my name and he goes, oh yes, Mr. Engel, I know all about the drawing. You won't be doing any of it here. And I'm just like, whoa! Of course, he was dead wrong, because by the time I would be out of any of his classes, I'd have a stack of drawings like this, because one of the things you learn to do as a cartoonist, particularly, is to draw covertly. If I was in a meeting with any of you guys, and there were a couple of my artist friends there, when it was over, we'd all flip our tablets up 4 or 5 pages, and it would be full of drawings that we had done covertly of all of you. We had like walls of flying characters and stuff. So yeah. And then when I was like in 5th grade, I was 10 years old, I bought my first Marvel comic books. And now today it's kind of today everybody in the world loves Thor and Captain America and stuff, but they don't know necessarily the comics. Like my daughter knows all about this stuff, but Marvel Universe. She's never read a comic book in her life, but it's elevated. Back then, when you would buy comic books, like I'd go to the drugstore, it's almost like, I'll take these for my 5-year-old brother who's sick at home, because the cute girl behind the counter, you didn't want her to think you were reading comic books, And comic books, like everybody reads comic books now, and graphic novels or a whole thing. But if you read a comic book on a train, people would assume you were mentally defective or something like that. It's like on TV, Gomer Pyle read comics, you know what I mean? It's like no. And so developing these interests past the time that people think you shouldn't have these interests, you know what I mean? It's like, you get to the point where you should be too old for cartoons, you should be too old for comic books and stuff. So it just kind of became a little bit of a covert thing, because I never did tire of them, and I'm not tired of them to this very day. But it becomes a point that even with your peers, it's like, what's with you? Like, why are you doing this? And it was a foregone conclusion my whole life that I would be an artist. I couldn't even imagine doing anything else. I briefly flirted with the notion of being a clown or being an English teacher. I'm not suggesting there's a connection, but I did. And so I just devoured every book there was in comics. Walt Kelly, who did the comic strip Pogo, is my all-time favorite artist. Of course, you couldn't grow up in the 60s and not be really influenced as a cartoonist by Charles Schulz, who I met later in life as one of the greatest days of my life. And in 8th grade, I was a Berwyn Life paper boy, news carrier. Know your carrier. It's like if this article came out today, it'd be like, whoa, that guy's a carrier. Like, don't get there. This was just a way of saying that, then the Spotlight newspaper guys. It's interesting because it says my favorite classroom subject is English, which it was. I got a little plug in there for Timothy. Among his favorite sports is basketball and softball, which anybody that knew me, this is another way of like, I want people to think I'm gay, So, and they did, by the way. That's another thing I just would have to say. If you were like a non-sport person, this is so politically incorrect. It was like, what are you, homo? You don't like baseball? And then it was like, and I would be like one of 8 so-called homos in right field, standing around talking. So it says my hobbies were collecting comics and drawing cartoons, which were my ambition becoming a cartoonist, running a comic book store. I do not run a comic book store. So the next one is, okay, so then I'm in high school at Timothy, and school paper and stuff like that. And I have my whole life with my Timothy friends and stuff, but you can go to the next one. But I found out when I was a junior high that there was this whole world of comic fandom. You might see on the news these days like Comic-Con International is like a huge worldwide event. I went to that like in the 70s when it was a small thing, and I could walk across this way and talk to Ray Bradbury, and I could go another 10 feet and talk to Siegel and Schuster, who created Superman. Now it's this big worldwide thing. Back then, there were not comic book stores. The guy on the right And the t-shirt and the shorts and shirt is a guy named Joe Sarno, who probably became the premier guy in Chicago for comic books, comic book stores, comic book knowledge, and all that. We used to meet in his basement on Saturdays and buy comics out of his house. And these guys are all artist friends of mine that I found in my neighborhood and through my interest in comics. So these were not Timothy guys. And I almost had this like dual life. And sometimes people knew some of these people overlap, but I had my Timothy friends in my life, and then I had my fandom, Comic Fandom, which really became a way of life back then. And so I started doing comic strips for fanzines, which are essentially amateur published comic books or magazines and stuff like that. I did that in high school. Did that in high school. And then I reached the end of high school. So that's graduation night for me. And the guy with me is Alan's brother-in-law, Gerald Post. And you wouldn't think it to look at me in this photo, but I really didn't know what I was going to do next. You can go your whole life going, well, I'm going to be an artist, but all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm out of stuff to do here to stall this out. What am I going to do? And I didn't really know. I was working in a local drugstore at the time, and I graduated Timothy when I was 17. So the summer of 1974, I'm really not sure what I'm going to do. I had thought about art school, and I'd sent away for some catalogs, but I just didn't know. So you can go to the next slide. This guy, his name is Jim Johnson. He died a few months ago. I think this is what prompted Alan to ask me to talk here. I wrote a kind of lengthy thing on my Facebook page about him. So I don't know what I'm going to do, right? Down the block, halfway down my block, is the Johnson family. And my sister Lisa's 10 years younger than me. And she played with their daughter. So our families got to know each other, This guy was a phenomenal photographer. He was the head of photography for an agency downtown on Wabash and Lake called Feldkamp Malloy. If you knew a lot about advertising, I don't expect you to necessarily, but it's kind of a legendary place. It was just, they worked with every client, every agency in the city, Leo Burnett, they worked on every client, McDonald's, whatever, it was a big deal. So he was the head of their photography department. They had two divisions, art and photography. And he one day said to my parents, would you like me to take some of Jimmy's stuff downtown and get it evaluated at my office, And we thought, yeah, okay, great. So taking my work down at that point would have been some things I'd done for the Fine Arts Festival at Timothy, and just a big stack of lined notebook paper with big pen drawings on it. It wasn't like some huge portfolio. So he takes it down and he shows it to the president of the company and some other people. And I get this call, can I come in the next day? So I come in, and you can go to the next slide. And I have this meeting with them, and they go, we can read this essentially. These are like seasoned veterans. This is just my notebook scrawlings and stuff. And basically, they said we can see that we can read this. We can see that you have potential and that you can become a professional artist. And they had an opening. It was an apprentice job, which was the ultimate grunt work, really. You worked, you prepared, packaged people's artwork for them to take out to clients and stuff. In those days, before the internet, people literally carried big, giant portfolio bags full of original art by all the artists that worked here. They would go to a client and say, well, we've got this guy and this guy and this guy. So my job was accompanying salespeople, running out to buy art supplies, whatever they needed. But in the meantime, I was supposed to be developing my own portfolio in my spare time that they would then include. So I say to them, well, I don't know, I was thinking of going to art school. And they said, well, you could go to art school, but you could also work here. You could always go to art school at any point, but you could learn a lot here. This in terms of my personality and my life experience so far was another thing where I just think God knew exactly what to do with me. I didn't go to art school. And I don't think my personality type would have liked art school. I didn't like school in general. I liked learning my own stuff. I was always been really curious, so I said this earlier, I have no casual interest. So if an artist or something interested me, I didn't just go, oh, I like this. I'd be at the library finding out everything I could about this thing. So that was my schooling. All that comic book and cartoon stuff up until that point had been my school. That's how I learned stuff. I didn't copy or trace stuff particularly, but I just absorbed it, and I think subliminally just picked up techniques and stuff that then I would eventually be able to do myself. So these guys, they give me an office in this place. And it's the same office that the greatest artists there have. The offices are all the same size, it's a beautiful old building. get an office, I get all the art supplies I could possibly want as a kid, which was a big deal to me. And as an adult, art supplies, maybe after women's shoes, are the most ridiculously priced things in the world, So I had all I wanted. I had a key to the place. I could be in there Saturday night at 10 o'clock if I wanted to, working there. And it was a great experience. I loved the people. It was a little bit of a culture shock for a kid who grew up in Timothy to suddenly be out in the world. Between graduating high school and a couple months later, I'm working downtown in this place. And I was a little bit, that wasn't, I'm not saying I was some Puritan as a high school kid, but I was a little bit startled by language, by the pictures that people had hanging in their office in a day when, not that this was, but I did work in a place like this where someone's office was basically, a museum of pornography. Things that you couldn't possibly do today, you know what I mean? But back then it was a loosier world. So I loved working downtown. I'd been downtown on my own once in years, and I loved it. I would be everywhere in the city during the course of the week. They gave me petty cash, and I just had to run errands and stuff. And there was a couple of experiences at that time that, so I'm making $85 a week, and I take home like 62 or something like that. And I would cash my check at the currency exchange in my building every Friday. I'm walking down Michigan Avenue, and I'm 18. I'm getting ready to cross the Michigan Avenue Bridge with some stuff. And some older guy catches we make eye contact. People would later say, mistake number one, don't make eye contact with anybody on the street in Chicago. This guy stops me and he says, can I talk to you? And I said, yeah. And he says, now I will say this, I have to admit this about myself. I really am intrigued by people on the street. I remember when I was picking up my father-in-law from a trip at Union Station, my family's there waiting, and I go to the John and I don't come back for like 20 minutes. And my wife says to me, where were you? And I said, I was in the bathroom. I met this guy who was on a flying saucer. It's like I was really intrigued. So this guy stops me and I talk to him. He says to me, my name is Harold Smith. My life is a mess. My wife's divorced me. I don't have my kids. I don't have a job. I'm going to kill myself. And not just kill himself. He specifically was going to pour gasoline on himself and kill himself. And now, here's your little kind of young Christian test. And I'm like, well, no, man, you can't do that. God loves you, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, he said, well, he needs $20. If he got $20, he'd be able to take the cab driver's test and some other things. Well, I shell out $20, like a third of my paycheck to the guy. And I couldn't do anything else because my upbringing and my belief system would be like, you can't just walk away from this. It was confusing to me in a way because I wasn't that old. But anyway, I go back to the office and I tell some people the story. I met this guy on the street. And these guys are all like, what are you, nuts? Those guys make more money than you do in a year, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, now I start to feel stupid, but I also formed the view, and I think, to this day, I think it's true, because I've had a lot of interaction with homeless people and street people in Chicago. People tell themselves that because it lets them off the hook. If I form an official view that everybody that asks me for money on the street is a drug addict, an alcoholic, and a cheat, a liar, and they're just using me, then I can walk past them all the time, and it's already in there. Don't talk to this guy. Well, I go home that night and I tell my parents this story, and I'm thinking I'm going to hear more about what are you nuts? Are you stupid? And my parents were great. My dad's like, no, if that's what you think, you felt God was moving you to do, you did the right thing. It doesn't matter. Well, great. The following Monday, that guy's in the waiting room where I work. Yeah, Jim, boy, it didn't work out. And I said, Harold, look, I don't have any more money to give you. Well, that's great. I'll get back on my feet. We'll go out for a steak dinner, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, amazingly enough, in a city the size of Chicago, I ran into this guy like a couple of more times. I ran into him coming out of one of the big cathedrals downtown where I was going in to look at the statues and stuff like that. But, to this day, I just look at it. It's like an interesting story. You couldn't do anything different. But I had a lot of experiences on the street with, people around my office. I work in River North, and it's like, I do make the eye contact, so I guess. But it's just interesting to me. I think it comes down to like, what is God telling you to do? I've actually told people, you might be lying to me. I don't have any idea. This is between you. That's between you and God, and me helping you now is between me and God. So I've had situations on the street where like, the guy says to me like, can I have a hug after I get through? And I'm like, yeah, because you're a really big guy. Can I have a hug? I'm like, yeah, okay. So I'm hugging some guy on the street. He doesn't pick me up. So I have to lift him off the ground to make this a meaningful experience for him. Another time, some guy was talking right outside my office. He's like, it was getting cold, he's like, and he said, he doesn't have any warm clothes. I'm wearing like the warmest, my favorite shirt actually, this pullover thing. And I go, do you want this shirt? And he goes, seriously? And I go, yeah. And so I take the shirt off, I give it to him, he goes, now, Christian Jim is going like, well, that was the right thing to do. I don't really think about the fact that I now have to go back to my office and work the rest of the day in a t-shirt inexplicably for anybody. But, and so the way stuff like that develops, Alan, when he was at Faith, got us involved in pads, and I worked the pads thing for like 16 years because this will come in a little bit. I had a real obsession for some strange reason about being out of work. I don't know where it came from. It's like I was a guy born in the Depression or something, like all my identity came from work. You can go to the next slide. So anyway, to make a long story short, not to make gross fingers, I decide to leave this apprentice job and I'm going to get a job. I've been in all the ad agencies, I know where they are and stuff. So I started circulating at 19 with a portfolio, and I don't find the work. And I go to this place. There's an ad in the paper for a greeting card company, and I go down there. It's on Irving and Ashland, basically. And great, I get it. Well, you have to leave your portfolio for art. I go, yeah, no, I can't do that because if I leave it here for a few days, what am I going to do? I was like really desperate at 19 to find work. And so I take my portfolio and I think I don't say that. And my parents were like, just chill a little bit. I'm like, no, can I paint the basement for my room and board? It was like a weird obsession that started then with like having to be occupied and so, well, I don't find an art job, but my favorite place to hang out if I wasn't, in some art related thing or comic related thing was a bookstore. So I got a job at Proxima Town downtown for a few months, and that was a haven. This sort of stereotypical thing that in Hollywood, everybody that's pumping gas or waiting tables is an aspiring actor or actress. I learned that bookstore people are all aspiring playwrights and artists and stuff, but this is a place I think you could like to be. I learned that liking to spend my free time in bookstores and working in a bookstore had nothing to do with it. But one day, I got a phone call. And one of these guys that I knew on Saturdays when my friends and I would go make the rounds of all the comic stores in Chicago, and I met a lot of people like myself, young artists who want to get published, who did stuff with his families. And this guy calls me and he says, I'm working at this greeting card company, and they need another artist, and I think they'd hire you if you came in. So now, I'm not expecting this. I mean, every benchmark, every transition in my work, and I've never been out of work a day for somebody who's really concerned about that sort of thing. I go to work every day, no matter whatever my job was, senior vice president of this company, I'm an executive vice president of the current company. I go to work every day thinking I could be fired. And it's an uncomfortable thing, but I think it helps you. I think the worst thing you could do is to become too confident in your value in places. So this guy calls me. I didn't know it. And I say, well, where are you at? He tells me the name of the greeting card company. And I realized that's the same place that I went 3 months ago and didn't leave my portfolio. And 3 months later, they're still looking for an artist, So I look at that and I go, okay, well, I dropped the ball, but God's going to push the ball forward for me. So the company was called Mark One. It's a greeting card company. Mr. Blau here used to pick up at Mark One, and he would inform me at every Timothy gathering where we ran into each other how they didn't pay their bills. It was a pretty decent place. It was, but anyway, it was in this historic building. Go back one. This historic building called the Kurt Type Company, which is where they bought the building after the company went under. But pick up any old postcard. 50% of them, if not more, will all be made by Kurt Type. Even that Berwyn one earlier was. So I worked in this cool old building, and my job was to do greeting cards. Now they hired me. And it occurred to me when I went home after getting hired, I'm excited, but I'm like, I've never spent an entire day drawing in my life. I've never gotten up at 9, drawn, and quit drawing at 5. I don't know if I'll be able to do this. You can go to the next frame. So there I am drawing greeting cards. It was wonderful work. The place was as oppressive as could be, as was the next place that I worked in. The 9 years I did greeting cards, I developed probably all the skills that would set me up for the rest of my life. But it was not a great place to work. So I did greeting cards. That was like a store display. What I did primarily were what were called studio cards. You don't see them so much more, but if you remember, the sort of vertical greeting cards that are humorous. And they would buy the jokes from freelance writers, and I eventually started writing a lot of them myself too, so I could make some extra money in that. And occasionally I would model for displays. And so I finally got to pay off my clown thing. Now the significance of this kind of is that you might recognize these characters. It's Hagar the Horrible, Andy Capp, High and Lois, and Henry. I drew all those. And they started getting into what's called licensing. They licensed the rights to a property, and we worked. So this forced me to kind of use my knowledge of cartoons, which I'd sort of absorbed as a kid. And I can work in a lot of different styles, which proved to be very useful for me as I see the progression later. So stickers in the 80s were this huge thing. I did tons of sticker sheets with characters that I loved, like Woody Woodpecker and stuff. And those are also stickers. I realize I'm going way too slow here, so keep going. So that's all stuff I did at the greeting card company. And like I said, for about 9 years I was there. At that point, that's my high school girlfriend, well, just not a high school girlfriend, Charisse on the left there. That picture was taken by John Hartman, who maybe some of you guys know. We got married around this time, which is, guess what, the upper right picture. And Charisse was really supportive of me. And she also, at the time when she was still working, was making more money than I was too. And her family would be like, so he wants to be an artist. It's like they were looking towards her future and thinking like, yeah, this doesn't sound really good. But she was always great about it, and it's one of the blessings I have in my life. And she is this morning. She called down from upstairs at 5. You'll do great. So we eventually had 3 kids. We see on the left there, and there we all are as adults with a couple of additional spouses, and us with our grandkids on the bottom. This is that sort of sideline. So the Comic Fandom for me was a whole way of life. I got involved with conventions. I used to be one of the people who worked in setting up the Chicago Comic Convention when it first started. That's me doing a character, the publisher of Mad Magazine. And then I would sell these little original art things that I made at conventions for years. And then this is some stuff I started doing then for the beginning of doing my desire to do comics, which is what I always wanted to do, but unfortunately, superheroes, as much as I love them, were the craze, and I'm like a funny animal cartoonist, basically. So now, what happened? This is one of the things that most stands out in my mind. And I mentioned before, I look at my life, and all these transitions they're never things I pursued. They're always things that God presented me with. So that's David C. Cook. That was like one of the biggest. They still are one of the biggest Christian publishers in the world. They were located in Elgin, and that's an old postcard, but they really did have that setup up there. One day I'm at the greeting card company, and it's at the time that my first child, Calvin, was going to be born. And Charisse, we decided, is going to quit work. Well, I mentioned she made a good living, and we're dealing with like, what's the future going to be like if we're just living on my paycheck. I'm at the greeting card company, and out of the blue, I get a phone call from a guy. His name is Craig. He says, you don't know me, but I know your work. I've seen it in comic-related stuff and stuff like that. I've been hired by David C. Cook to kind of revamp their Sunday school curriculum. And I'm hiring artists with more contemporary styles because if you remember the Sunday school papers you grew up with, it depends on your age, I guess. Well, I grew up with, they were kind of stodgy. So he says, I think you'd be good for this. Would you like to do it? So I say, sure. Well, I started working for David C. Cook as a freelancing. All cartoonists probably augment their income with freelance. It's just the thing, and I did too. I've always done a lot of freelance work up until some years back. But I don't know this company. I never heard of this company. And I never met this guy. But I started doing Sunday school curriculum for David C. Cook. And this is good at this point in life because I appreciate the fact that I can do some explicitly Christian work, and that's what it was. The other weird thing I found out later, because I met other artists who worked for them, was like, oh, Cook is great, but they're really feast or famine, right? I mean, you get a job one time, and then you don't get anything for months, and blah, blah, blah. I had nonstop work from David C. Cook for 15 years. There was never a time when I didn't have something on my drawing board for them. Given what I know about the way other people work with them, this is like a huge blessing. The work that I did for them bridged the gap between my daytime work and our needs as a family with my wife not working. So there's a few slides of this stuff. So these are examples of Sunday school paper things I would do. You can back it up, take a look at it a little longer. These are the handouts. All my work I've always worked in like secret. So that's me loading the truck with the car in the back there. And then for years, you can go to the next one. I think 7-8 years, I did their entire Bible school thing. So churches would buy these kits. It was a ton of work every year. It was great because I paid well. But you go to the next one. I did posters and the books that the leaders had and the cutout clip art and stuff like that. So that was a great thing. And even at one point, this is a book they published written by a guy from Wycliffe Bible Translators about kids' careers in mission. And then over the years, I did stuff for my church and Timothy and stuff like that. So I've never been totally away from that. And yes, if any of you went to Trinity, I designed a troll guy. So one day, my art director of the greeting card company takes me aside in a closet so we can't be seen and tells me that the company is in bad shape. Mr. Blau knows this because they didn't pay their bills at a certain point. And he's leaving. He's going to go to this company called Diamond Toy Makers. And I'm listening to this. It was like a movie, where like the sound goes off and you're just like, things are floating around. I'm like, this company's, and I liked my job. I loved drawing and I hated the place, but I didn't like this guy that I'm talking to. But he tells me he's going to this place. Well, I don't know if you guys have ever heard this, but in the back of my mind, I was like, well, if this dries up, I know about this toy company in Niles called Diamond Toy Makers. I'll go there. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to go to Diamond Toy Makers. Diamond Toy Makers, that's my go-to place. I don't want to go there with you, And he's going, and he's telling me the company's not looking good, and they have an opening for a creative director there, and he's going to go there. He'll get the job. He'll bring me in. He wants to take me with, because he's appreciated my work. Well, then I realized that the creative director he's talking about is a friend of mine who's like going to get fired. So now I know this. It's like this was like heinous. I go interview with these people, and I end up getting the job, which was great. So again, kind of a seamless transition from a bad scenario into a better scenario. And so that's me at Diamond Toy Makers. I did notice in putting this slideshow together that I have a penchant for plaid shirts that runs through my entire life. But and there, my beginnings at the other company, the licensed stuff helped because they did three-dimensional toys. I never had designed for toys. That was interesting because usually what I did was illustration, which this stuff was. So, but we worked with these licensed properties. These were done for kids' luggage and for school supplies and stuff like that. So it broadened the amount of the kind of licensed character stuff I was working with. And yeah, cool. And I got to work with stuff, I'm a huge Muppets fan, so I got to work on stuff I like. I was not so much a professional wrestling fan, but I did work some wrestling stuff. Now around this time, I get a call from somebody who knows my work. Again, every step of this stuff, like getting involved in fanzines when I was a kid, getting involved in Comic Fandom, it's a network where people really know, they follow other people's work. I did myself. So I get a call from King Feature Syndicate, which is one of the biggest publishers of suppliers of newspaper comics. And they asked me if I want to draw the Mickey Mouse comic strip for the newspapers. And I'm like, yeah, I would love to do that. Now, Mickey Mouse wasn't like Doonesbury or something where it's super popular. It wasn't in a ton of papers at that point, but it was in enough, and it was like, this has come full circle. Now Jimmy will work for Walt Disney, So for, it was a period, I don't know, about 4 months or something. I drew the comic. Back it up once. See, there I am in that last panel sitting behind the people a bit goofy. I would always work with my friends or my family. But that was another great experience. And then I did, so I started doing comic book stuff. Not a ton of it, because there isn't a lot of the kind of stuff I do really being done, but did some stuff for DC. These were covers for some comic books, Underdog and stuff. And again, I worked in a lot of different styles, and I love the Marx Brothers, so I did some stuff with Marx Brothers. This is a comic book cover. Yeah. A few more comic book covers. Okay, stop. So, I'm at Diamond Toy Makers doing this stuff, and they do a lot of licensed stuff, which is great. But they start getting, interested in stuff I don't want to work on. One of the dilemmas of anybody who works in advertising or, products and stuff is like, you may not want to work on liquor, you may not want to work on cigarettes and stuff. So far, since the stuff I do is very kid-oriented, these are not issues particularly for me. But they got the license for Freddy Krueger. And I was just like, no, I'm not doing this. And the staffs are never big where I'm at. So if you say you're not going to do something, this is like kind of a problem, And I said, I can't do it. This is just not something I can comfortably work on. It was just kind of funny because in the world I'm in, nobody really gets that. They don't really get the idea of moral objection, and it's like business is business, I remember being in a meeting where the president of the company was going over stuff, we're going to do this, and Jim, you're going to work, you'll do for, oh no, you're not doing Freddy Krueger because you have morals. And it wasn't a joke. That's just kind of how he viewed it, So I'm at a point where I'm thinking, I don't know what the future holds for this. I don't want to be faced with stuff I don't want to do. And again, out of the blue, I get a phone call from a guy who works at a toy company. I just interviewed at a place today. They're not going to hire me, but I think they're looking for somebody like you. So I go in. It's the company, it's called Simon Marketing. They're the lead marketing agency for McDonald's, and they're one of the two agencies that provide Happy Meal toys. So I get hired to start doing Happy Meal design. They're in Oak Brook, the building was, and that's me again. I was happier than that looked. I'm probably not happy because I'm wearing another plaid shirt. But this is McDonald's corporate headquarters where I would go, several times a week. And so I started working at designing toys. Now it's a different world because you're designing three-dimensional things and you have to kind of an understanding of how toys work. But that's fine because I was a toy collector my whole life. So I got to work on all these great properties. We would go to Hollywood and New York all the time to learn about movies that were in process because you had to work on stuff that they were working on simultaneously. It was a wonderful, wonderful place. And unlike the other places I worked where it was like, I love this place, but I hate my work. I love my work, but I hate this place. This was the place where I loved my work and I loved the place. And I just got to do tons of stuff. I mean, for like 13 years, I worked on every Happy Meal program there was. And keep going. And sometimes it would be printed stuff, so that was nice because then my art would actually appear on an object like this stuff. So this goes along great, right? And then I couldn't be happier. And this is a place, stop. This was a place where everybody that worked there loved it and would have worked there forever. Except, am I talking too long? Yes, did you know?
No, yeah, finish up with this. This is home run, bro.
Okay, so at this point, I'm in the car with my creative team. We've gone downtown to do some research on a Happy Meal thing. We're driving back and we hear on the news that the FBI, Secretary of State John Ashcroft is on the news explaining that the FBI has been running a sting operation for 10 years, and that the company that makes the Monopoly games has been being ripped off for 10 years. The guy responsible in security for sending out the tickets to different parts of the country has been caught, and that's the company I work for. It's another group, but they do that. And our company is fired worldwide, like a huge agency worldwide, on all the McDonald's business. And there's even a 5-part documentary about this on HBO. I don't know if any, I have reason to remember this, but it was horrible. It was the worst time of my life, and because this dream thing is going down the drain for all of us. And then 2 weeks later to the day is 9/11. So it wasn't really like the greatest period of time. So we can go to the next slide. That's a drawing from my sketchbook. I kept a sketchbook. That's me hanging from a trapeze, and that's the hand of God underneath it that I'm counting on to catch me. I couldn't draw for weeks after that. And then everybody in this place is scrambling to try and find work. Nobody wants to do that work. Somebody finds out that the core team on the McDonald's Happy Meal, so me as head of creative or head of product development, design, whatever, are all intact. And just out of the blue, Burger King needs another agency. Everyone's got 2 agencies that do this stuff, and they're looking for one. So we get involved in a competition for this. I find out that I'm going to go to this new agency that wants to get the Burger King business. Biggest ad agency downtown has decided there's an opening for Burger King. They want to do it. They find out that there's this intact group at McDonald's. They hire all of us to start a new company. And I spent every night for 3 months in my backyard, just like this, staring up in the sky, imploring God to get me out of this. And this is like the day that I found out that we got it, and then I left Simon. You can go to the next one. And this is my office downtown. So I leave McDonald's on a Friday, and on a Monday I start on Burger King, and I've been doing that since 2001, whatever. I had to learn to, at a certain point I had to learn to work digitally instead of just drawing. But these are some things I did for Burger King. And that's where I've been ever since, to this moment, except I've been working at home for the last couple of years with COVID. We do stuff for Kellogg's as well, and so we can stop there. And that's me in my office currently there with another platter check here. So when I look at it, I think, I'll just come full circle. I come to the same couple of things. For whatever reason, I'm a person who just fears unemployment. It's a weird thing. And the biggest problem I have as a Christian is trusting God's promises, really accepting the notion that God will take care of you. And yet if I look back at all of this, at every point, nothing instigated by me, God put me in another situation and made a transition through some very difficult times in some cases. I mean, it may not sound like a big deal, I don't want to work at Freddy Krueger, but it was a difficult time for me to think, what's going to happen here? If I keep refusing work, they're going to fire me. And at every point in the story, somebody calls me or somebody contacts me. And there's an analogy about life that, if you look at your life on one side, you can see a beautiful tapestry, right? But if you flip it over, it's this horrible mess of tangled threads that you don't see from the other side. Or that for every beautiful marble sculpture, it gets there because somebody's smacking it with a hammer and a chisel over and over until it gets to that point. So, ultimately what it comes down to is I thank God for my Christian upbringing. The talent and the opportunity to continue to develop the talent, but all these intervals where if I wouldn't have known at the time I was in turmoil, but God just kept moving it along, I've had a very blessed career as an artist, and I'm very grateful for it. I hope this wasn't too tedious if you don't care about comics or cartoons or whatever. That's
Okay, fantastic.